Excellent. Okay, so let's start. Good morning or good afternoon to everyone, and welcome to our 2022 Supply Chain Symposium, our three-part virtual series dedicated this year to the broad topic of designing resilient supply chains for the future. So our symposium has been organized by a Marquette Center for Supply Chain Management, which is the home of two elite supply chain management programs, our undergraduate and graduate program. We are ranked by Gartner as number 12 in the US at the undergraduate and number 15 at the graduate level, and by US News as number 16 at the undergraduate level. Before we continue, I would like to thank all our sponsors, our platinum sponsors, Uline, Direct Supply, and Milwaukee Tools. And I would also like to thank our gold sponsors, Redwood Logistics, GE Healthcare, our silver sponsor, Kohler, and our two blue sponsors, Plexus and UPS. This is our third and the last part of this year's symposium, and our third part is titled, "What role can small and medium enterprises play in improving supply chain resilience?" And it's my distinct pleasure to be able to welcome today our three panelists. We have with us Annie Williams. Annie is a former head of North America supply chain for home cleaning, shoe care, natural and professional consumer product division at SC Johnson. Over her highly cross-functional 35-plus-year career, she directed teams managing global end-to-end supply chains, administered P&Ls, and passionately developing people, processes, programs, and systems that netted in historical breakthrough results. Our second panelist is Christina Ryan. Christina Ryan is the Executive Vice President of Managed Services at Redwood Logistics. She came to Redwood in 2015 to help establish what is now the Client Success and Operations Team for Managed Services. With 15 years of experience helping customers solve problems, her attention to detail, transparency in communication, and strategic supply chain expertise are strengths that she brings to Redwood clients. In 2020, Redwood's Management Services unit experienced double-digit growth from their customer retention program and collaboration efforts under Christina's leadership. Our third panelist is Phil Weir. Phil leads the sales team for SAP's consumer products customers based in the Midwest, which are some of SAP's largest global customers. He oversees the expansion and adoption of all SAP's broadening enterprise applications portfolio. Prior to the current role at SAP, Phil held leadership role for SAP new customer segment in the Midwest and value advisor organization, assisting customers, large and small, with transformational program, governance and investment strategies, as well as working with sales and customer leadership roles for several successful startups. Before we continue, I want to remind the audience that they can ask questions in our Q&A section. So please feel free to post the questions while this discussion is taking place. And in the last 15 minutes of this webinar, around 12:45, we'll actually take time and try to address as many of them as possible. Before we continue with this discussion, I think it's good if I just shed a little bit of a light on the rationale of why are we actually talking today about the role of the SMEs. And the first thing that I want to kind of clear with the audience for our common understanding, what is actually an SME. So if you look at the definition of the small and medium-sized enterprise, European Union actually has a quite tight definition of SME being a company with less than 250 employees, but here in the United States, that number is an enterprise with less than 500 employees. Now, in the US, if you look at the role of the SMEs in the US economy, in the US, SMEs represent 99.9% of all US businesses count-wise, right? So they represent a really large proportion of private private sector. They account for 43% of domestic GDP, and they employ 47.1% of private workforce. So when it comes to supply chain risk and SMEs, we tend to always gravitate towards large companies, what large companies can do, how large companies have been impacted, and so on. However, just if we look at the numbers that are just presented over here, it becomes very clear that everyone's supply network is full of SMEs. And normally these are the companies that tend to have less knowledge, less resources, less understanding of supply chain risk and resilience practices. And it is really critical, right, to take that their view as well, their perspective as well, given that we have learned, particularly in the last 2.5 years, that not only they can be severely disrupted by the disruptive event in the supply chains, they can also be an important source of risk for the rest of the entities in the supply network. And with our three panelists today, we want to explore a little bit what that role of SMEs actually is, how they are different, and what they could do in order to improve an overall supply chain resilience. So I'll stop sharing my screen now, and we'll go straight to our panelists. Just a second. Let me do this like this. Good. And I'll turn with my first question to Annie. So all three of you have been playing an important yet slightly different roles in helping small and medium-sized businesses dealing with supply chain risk. So Annie, let me start with you, and could you please tell us a bit, based on your own experience dealing with SMEs, how are SMEs different when it comes to dealing with supply chain risk comparing to large organizations, large companies?
Sure, absolutely, Marco. Thanks for having me. So I think a few ways that small, medium enterprises manage differently than large enterprises is one, and it's going to be on a spectrum, on a scale, because it depends on the size of the SME versus the large corporation. But obviously, one of the first things is many times SMEs can be more flexible and more nimble than your large corporations, because there's a lot more processes, more infrastructure, things of that nature. So that's one way. Another way is it also depends on their postponement strategies. And I think overarching, the biggest thing that I've seen is depending on an SME's strategy and a large corporation's strategy, they can sometimes have some pretty significant challenges and or have some really solid intersections that make them really great, viable partners. So when I'm talking about postponement strategies, it can be anything from just a raw material, chemical, any of your basic raw materials that are required, and how you as an SME choose to either hold them and then how you postpone them downstream. Some SMEs do. They make it easier for large corporations to create just-in-time processes. Some don't, which makes it a little bit more difficult in having to do maybe, take and pay strategies and or redefine a large corporation strategy that maybe they may not be as nimble and able to do. So there's a couple of ways right there.
Thank you very much, Annie. Phil, let me continue with you. Following what Annie said, could you tell us what are some of the key issues SMEs are facing in the space of supply chain risk management that you see, from the technology provider's perspective?
Yeah, thank you, Marco. And Annie, that was perfect, because I think a lot of what we see as we try to help the small and medium enterprises sort of build out their capabilities to address this disruption. A lot of the things that they are lacking is the ability to really understand how data is critical to their being able to execute inside the supply chain and really react to the disruption that we're seeing all over the place. And really turn it into an opportunity for them. I mean, we really have a basis right now where many companies are nearshoring a lot of their supply to reduce some of this risk. And that is an opportunity that we'd like to take advantage of here domestically. And one of the first things that we think about when we look at the difference between a large organization and its use and its management of data is that there tends to be a lot less ownership of the data in the small and medium enterprises. And I think that's really the first step, Marco, is for them to assign ownership and take accountability that the data that they have in their organization, whatever systems they're using, it doesn't matter, it could be Excel, that they recognize the importance of accountability for that information, because that information then can become the asset to take advantage of the changes that they're seeing. So like they assign ownership to cost centers and assign ownership to physical distribution centers or manufacturing facilities, they need to treat data as the same type of asset. And then that person can be responsible for maintaining and curating that data to reflect the operations that the organization wants to project to the market. Whether they want to be a quick turn operation or whether they want to go into a different postponement strategy like Annie referenced, the data needs to be there to enable the processes and the customer service levels that they want to hit. So that's the first one I would come forward with.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Phil, because I think when you have clear data owners, I know one of the things that's really important for us as a large corporation, because many times SMEs will have one person that will wear multiple hats.
Right.
And let's face it, we can be, a jack of all trades, a master of none.
Right.
So one of the things that we struggle with is sometimes we need that one-to-one contact with the quality person who owns the
Right.
quality data versus the person in the office that is the customer service rep, who's the shipping receiving clerk. I mean, so the more segregated and defined the roles and responsibilities are, for us, it's easier to work with, but also too for you in owning the data.
You make a really good point there, because I neglected to say it can't be an IT person.
Right.
It really needs to be a business person that owns the data. And when it gets stuck in IT, it tends to get old and stagnant.
Phil, thank you very much, and Annie, thanks for your addition as well. Christina, coming from a logistics provider's perspective, Phil provided a very interesting insight from a technology provider's perspective. So if you take view with your hat on from a logistics provider perspective, how do you see the role of SMEs in improving this supply chain resilience from a logistics provider perspective?
It's a good question, Marco. I think, from the logistics provider perspective, we're really here to support, enable, and drive supply chain efficiencies for shippers or customers. So when you look at the small or medium-sized enterprises, they typically have less resources than large organizations. But there's a few areas that we see as opportunities to improve supply chain resilience, and we see a lot of our customers taking advantage of that. First would be sourcing. So finding alternate suppliers, using other avenues to find raw materials, and not just using one supplier that supplies everything, right? How do you create diversification there? So if something happens to that supplier or something happens in the supply chain that gets you the supplier's materials, that you're able to recover or mitigate the risk. So for example, right, let's say steel as a commodity. Roughly speaking, let's call 50 to 60% of the steel in the world is produced out of China. That has a huge impact in the US, right? So you have to source those materials from China. You can source them from elsewhere too. But for small to medium-sized enterprises, sourcing typically comes down to cost and speed to manufacturing so that they're not impacting their customers. You've got to take all of those variables into account when you're sourcing your suppliers. Larger organizations might have more capability, more resources to support widely there. So that's a variance that we're seeing more of the small to medium-sized enterprises take advantage of. Another area that I think is starting to gain some ground in improving supply chain resilience is flexible and creative shipping. This one speaks a little bit more to my logistics side, obviously, but there's many ways to ship freight: LTL, parcel, truckload, right? and some of those are much more cost effective than others. So understanding your current transportation model that you're leveraging as a shipper, and a small company might be constrained a little bit to source that transportation or the logistics bit based off of their smaller orders, limited scale, limited manufacturing. So when you think about how you can understand your current model, what your utilization rates are, what's your load factor, what's your opportunity out there, those efficiencies can help create opportunity to improve your resiliency within the supply chain. So when I was thinking about this question, Marco, one of the things that came up was like, how does a real world example that you can apply that to, right? So it's really common among small businesses to have smaller orders. They're shipping LTL or parcel, right? We know that's an ineffective, more expensive mode of transportation. Smaller orders don't fill up the full truck. The full truck is more, going from point A to point B, usually faster and usually much more economical. So when you're leveraging the LTL and parcel modes, you really need to start looking for consolidation opportunities, multi-stops, pooling, things like that can really help drive that diversification or the dynamic supply chain modeling to help you get to your consumers. And sometimes that's really hard for SMEs, right? Like when you have a limited size and scale, and as you grow and you get bigger and bigger, it becomes much more easy to adapt multimodal shipping. Another example could be leveraging 3PLs, right? You usually have limited resources as an SME, and leveraging other experts or outsourcing certain work, whether it's 3PL or co-packing and co-manufacturing. Other opportunities like that can help supplemental some weaknesses that an SME might have, whether it's through staffing or resourcing or general capital. So lots of opportunity there. I think at the end of the day, it's just becoming more dynamic for SMEs to become more dynamic to mitigate the risk and become more resilient in the supply chain area.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Excellent. Christina, thank you very much. Annie, let me turn to you again. So when we look at, in general, our supply chain resilience practices, and we learned this from the past two webinars as part of this symposium, particularly when Mr. Vakil was talking from Resilink about their approaches. He highlighted that two-pronged approach, the proactive and reactive, right? The proactive would be kind of like preparing for a disruption, and the reactive one would be reacting to a disruption. So in your experience, Annie, which approach do normally SMEs take or adopt? Is it the right one, or would you recommend anything else?
Well, having lived through the pandemic and experiencing this, night and day, I would have to say that it tends to seem that SMEs are still more reactionary. And I think going back to strategy, right? Because we can't store and inventory everything, but going back to strategy and understanding what you can manage and maintain from a cost perspective will give you leverage in being able to be a little bit more proactive when a disruption hits. But I have not seen the pendulum shift much at all. In that a lot of companies, even large ones included, are still reactionary. I think there are a couple of just very simple, basic things that some SMEs can do that can make it easier for themselves to be proactive for a disruption. Because let's face it, when it's massively going awry, you absolutely have to have some things in your back pocket in order to be able to try to either stay with the pace and or get ahead of the game. So an example of one simple thing is no matter who your customer base is, when you hit a disruption, you have to acquire new customers. So having your packet, your financial stability information, your DMB, everything ready to rock and roll for another new customer is absolutely imperative. I can tell you there were times during the pandemic, we were ready to do business with a new customer, and it took them forever to get us information for us to get them approved as a customer. So something just as simple as getting your packet together, having it ready to do business, and being able to expedite that whole process internally and externally. Another example is when you are sensing. So there's certain information that customers will give you or may say to you very much off the cuff. But you need to increase your sensorial factor of what you're hearing from your customers. And if you're not hearing it, you need to start asking the questions in order to understand and know, okay, and I've heard 3 customers now tell me that they're hearing that steel is going to become a constraint potentially. So what levers do I need to pull now in order to start to get ahead? Is it extending my PO order lead times, to 90 days plus, whatever that timing may be. But at the end of the day, get your customer feedback and then start putting strategies in place to either stay at pace with it and or get ahead of it. So there's a couple: financial packet, listen to your customers, sense what they're telling you, and then be ready to act.
Annie, thank you very much. Phil, how about in your experience? So if you look at SMEs kind of from the technology perspective, what could they actually do to prepare better for supply chain disruptions? To sort of shift from that reactive into more a proactive state.
Yeah, I think first thing I would do is show my phone. I guess maybe it's a little blurred out, but the point being is, like our own real lives today, we operate in a speed an information speed and an assistance from what comes on our phone faster than we ever had before. And so when you look for technology providers or BPOs or third-party logistics companies, which are super beneficial in this time for creating, for covering that capacity gaps that we have and what we're trying to deliver, you should also couple with that at the same time asking the question of how are you going to take care of that operation and the execution of that operation right to your phone. Because if you can monitor your email, you can monitor your kids, you can monitor your home, you also should have the expectation of your technology providers and even your service providers that come with technology, that they're delivering you the information to be able to keep track of that like it's your own part of your business right to your phone. It shouldn't be scary for IT anymore. It shouldn't be scary for applications. It should be easy. And if it's not, then it's probably not the right partner for you, because as Christina said, you really need to think about how your providers scale your operations to act a little bit bigger. And so you can focus on the things that Annie was bringing up, right? What do my real financials look like? How do I present myself to these organizations when these opportunities do come?
Phil, thank you very much.
Phil, I think another really important aspect there too is it kind of ties Annie's question with yours. The volatility that we're seeing in the market, the economy, like what's happened the last 2 years, has been pretty significant. And if you don't leverage that technology to monitor and keep up with stuff, how do you mitigate the risk? Because things change week to week, month to month. It's so hard to keep up with it these days.
Yeah.
It's almost like you have to adopt and leverage that technology, or you are just going to be way in the reactive world, and you're not proactive at all.
Yeah, that is spot on, Christina. Because I can tell you, if as an SME, if you aren't able to have really super tight processes that can support not being EDI, you almost don't have a chance, because everything is going so fast and dynamically that, don't get me wrong, we have SMEs that aren't EDI capable, but yet that means that we then have to have the people then to support the processes. And as everyone knows, talent is a major challenge coming out of the pandemic. But at the end of the day, if you don't have the technology, you have to have the really tight super processes in order to be able to support what it is you're achieving.
Great point, Annie. Christina, let me follow up here with you now. So we hear often from SMEs, one of the arguments they put forward is that actually they have less control over their supply chain, right, than their bigger counterparts, either large suppliers or large customers. Would you agree with this? And what would be your recommendation based on the experience that you have? How could large companies and SMEs work together to better, to improve the resilience of the supply network?
So I think I would agree to an extent that SMEs have less control. First off, going to your definition at the beginning of the session, right? An SME is a pretty wide range of companies, right? So, and if it's 99% of the business in the US, you could have 10 employees and make $1 million in revenue. You could be 300 employees making $600 million in revenue. There's a wide range there in what an SME could be. So I do think that some of those on the smaller end of that scale, yes, they probably have less control than those at the top end of the scale. Smaller businesses typically have less resources, less capital, less people, and that tends to enable the larger organizations to really dominate in certain areas. But I do think that the smaller businesses often are looking to grow, and not that everybody's looking to grow, right? But when you're in that smaller end of the scale, you sometimes are trying to find ways to build market share quickly, and you look at those growth opportunities and try and make aggressive moves, and sometimes that can limit your control of your supply chain. If you're really trying to make aggressive moves to grow your business, you can position yourself to a certain location, to a certain customer, or to certain requirements that maybe limit your control. So I would say you have to watch out for that. So limiting control can vary, obviously, on the size of the company and what you're trying to achieve. But the second part of your question, Marco, what would be your recommendation for larger companies and SMEs to work together? I think from my perspective, I really see a lot of opportunity in open, honest, transparent communication, right? I think that you've got companies that are maybe not competitors at all, but they're in similar locations, they're similar supply chain networks, really building and strengthening relationships across companies that can help each other out leads to collaboration. And when you collaborate, you can uncover opportunities for benefits on both sides, right? It doesn't have to be one way or the other. So for an example would be, two businesses that are maybe in the southeastern Wisconsin region, and they're both importing goods overseas, or they're both shipping freight nationally. How can they work together to solve their transportation, distribution, logistics needs, right? There might be overlapping networks, there might be similar suppliers, there might be similar carriers that they can all work together on to solve a common problem that helps them both. And you really don't solve that in your silo. So that's where SMEs can work together and communicate and collaborate in an environment like we're seeing today, where the market is volatile, things are changing quickly. This will help them become more, maybe not proactive, but have a good, well, what if this happens? I can work with my partners to help mitigate things. Again, improving that resiliency of the supply chain.
Yeah, Christina, to your point, one area that I think is really important to call out in transparency, because I think we all have at some point in time experienced the negative impact of it, and that is, whether you're an SME or a large corporation, you have the right to say no. So even though you may have growth strategies, and let's face it, they're all quite aggressive, there's nothing worse than saying yes and then trying to deliver and not. So when we talk about pulling the right levers, sometimes the right lever is saying no, and it's okay. You usually will find the right partner at the right time. So I just think it's important, because there have been a number of SMEs that, in the spirit of wanting to grow, will try their best, but the failures are catastrophic. So feel comfortable in saying no. You'll get the right opportunity at the right time.
A good one.
And thank you very much. Phil, coming back to you, you said something important earlier, and I'm gonna link this question with what we have learned in the previous two sessions about how companies go about building these proactive approaches to risk management and building the resilience in the network. And it all starts kind of like with understanding of one's network, right? So who are my suppliers in the first tier, second tier, third tier, where they're located, number of employees, etc., etc. There's a lot of information that have to be collected. So the question I have for you is, how would an SME that is kind of like embedded in a network like that and experience that need for sharing some of this information with their client, how would they actually even start with the collecting information and deciding what to collect so they don't get over paralyzed, given that they are they have less resources, they have less knowledge, and so on. What do you see in your experience? What's kind of like the approach they normally take?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious thing is to Pareto it in terms of what's most important, in terms of the value. And maybe this is a little bit back to where Annie was going, which is there's probably situations right now that exist in businesses when there wasn't disruption, that there were products and therefore suppliers and supply networks that you were supporting that maybe you really didn't want to support and you just didn't know it. Maybe you didn't realize that they were not profitable. Sometimes the largest customers we have in the SMEs or the oldest customers we have tend not to be the most profitable. So I think the very first place to start is still inside your own organization and make sure you understand where margin is from in your business and where you're adding value to your own customer base, because that'll help you direct, where do I really see risk? What happens if this product line of mine does fall off? Maybe that's okay. Maybe that's one I'm willing to give up, but to know that and be proactive about which areas do you see risk in, and therefore then which ones am I going to invest my constrained resources in, following up with a more resilient business continuity type plan for if that particular supplier goes out of business in a product that I'm making the biggest margin on, and I want to keep and grow that business. That's the direction I want to go. So I think that's where I'd start, because otherwise, you're right. There are services out there that can provide, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 type analysis and give you the data. But then you just have more data about something, a bunch of stuff that you really haven't connected to yourself in your own operation.
Thank you very much. So following from that, from what you just said, and this is a really question for anyone from the panelists to answer, is one of the concerns that SMEs raise is potential opportunistic behavior from their customers when they are asked to disclose certain information, either about them or their parts of the network. What's your experience? How could, because kind of like the way I'm thinking about it, that's really something that has to be addressed jointly between the large and the small corporation. When a large corporation asks for information disclosure from the smaller corporation, how could they actually overcome that barrier of this mistrust? Because SMEs are concerned, right? How will that information actually be used? Can be used actually against our competitive positioning, maybe shared with somebody else, and so on. What's your experience?
Well, in my experience, well, there's a couple of things here. This is a big question. One, the first thing that comes to my mind is transparency, and what are you willing to risk for your reputation? So I come from a company that our reputation, and I think every company's reputation really matters. We require full transparency of knowing exactly where every single raw material comes from in the world. If you're not willing to share that with us, we're not willing to do business. And that was, I'm going to say, an evolutionary journey over the last several years. But at the end of the day, there are certain things that we stand for as a company that we would choose not to support. So that's one, risk of your reputation. So with transparency also comes confidentiality. They're one and the same for us. So if you share with us that you have, a tertiary supplier in a small part of the country that is using some type of illegal chemical, we appreciate that. We don't share it. It's in confidentiality that we learned it. And that doesn't go beyond our conversation. We will just choose not to do business. So for us, it consistently goes back to risk of reputation.
Yeah, I agree, Annie, and it's something we're going to see if when we do get through this bullwhip that we're in the middle of. The next wave for us is going to be all this information that's coming around sustainability and those rules and laws. So this is coming one way or another. It's either going to come quickly. If you want to go do business with some of the big companies, they're already being taxed by that, literally. If you look at the EPR things that are coming out, and it's going to hit California soon. So it's going to happen. Sure. We see it acutely in the food and the consumer packaged businesses. So I think you better be ready for it. You better be, like we talked about at the very beginning, you better be good at the basic data about your BOMs and your products and your profits. But because they're going to be asking for more and different things, including your network and where these products are being sourced from. Global track and traceability is going to be critical for everybody to be able to compete. And it's going to be a differentiator. I mean, the market value of a traceable product is much greater than it was before. 15 years ago when we tried this, it was like a 5% bump for a sustainability tag. Now they're seeing upwards of 30 to 45% increase in price premium. And you should be able to take advantage of that in terms of using that as an asset attached to your product, that you have the genealogy and that information comes in. But back to your original question, I would say it's still a sales process. When they're asking for that type of information, you need to be able to get something in order to participate in that. That's still a business to business decision, as Annie said. And you shouldn't be giving information to a company that you're potentially doing business with that you aren't getting equal value in return for. Otherwise, it's not going to be a good partnership long term.
Right. And I assume, Marco, and I don't mean to sound like an idiot, but I assume, and I think, Phil, you guys operate the same way. There's no conversation that takes place about anything from a business nature without a CDA. And those CDAs are honored and tracked. So I would say, as an SME, if you don't have that as the very first step of your process before you engage in any conversation of value, that you have a CDA that protects both parties.
Yep.
But I think, to your point, Phil, ingredient disclosure, I think, we've seen it over the last, 10, 15 years, just on food packages with, the calories and nutrition. I think all products, as we continue to move, I think EPA is going to continually drive organizations to be a lot more transparent with their ingredients.
Thank you, Annie. Yes, we are moving slowly towards quarter to one, towards the audience questions as well. So this is just a call for the audience. Ask any questions you want, and the panelists will try to address them. But I have about 3 questions at the moment over here, and just to follow up with the conversation that we had so far. And again, this is really a question for any of the 3 of you. So one question here is, do you see suppliers being more willing to share information about their own supplies in order to improve customers' visibility over the entire supply chain's resilience? The question is really, do you see kind of like increase in willingness of suppliers sharing the information about their part of the direct part of their network? Is there any change in that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll and Christina, feel free to jump in here, but I mean, we've seen a dramatic shift in it. And it actually, I work in mostly in consumer foods. A huge shift, and Christina mentioned this earlier, in the co-pack and co-man businesses, where the larger corporations are trying to get out of owning the assets, which they've been doing for years, but the increased amount of co-man and co-pack, where they're really just selling the product, designing and selling the products, is the speed of that has gone up dramatically in the last 18 months. And it was already accelerating, and that puts a lot of strain on not information inside the four walls, but better information outside and in between, as you mentioned, the networked information. And that is something that's a real opportunity for both technology companies as well as small companies, if they're prepared to do so.
Sure. Yeah, and I think following that, Phil, I have an example to the point that you're talking about. If you recall, when the pandemic hit, and we first started, as corporations and SMEs, we first started having the regulations put in place regarding when someone contracted COVID from a labor perspective, and all the different protocols you had to enforce. Everyone was hesitant, very hesitant and scared to share any information about, my co-packing line going down, because I had half the crew that was gone because they got COVID. So, and if you fast forward over, I'm going to say the 18 months, about 18 months following, it became very transparent and acceptable for people to say, no, I'm sorry, that my manufacturing hours decreased as a result of my labor impact. So I find that companies have been, as times continue to evolve, companies are becoming more transparent, but they're kind of also feeling their way through it. And that labor is an example. July of 2020, you would not have spoken of it. Today, you talk about it.
Absolutely. Thank you,
and
Annie.
I think that, Annie, like the transparency too kind of rolls into that. Like, it's almost the Amazon effect, if you will, from a logistics perspective. You have what Amazon has done is basically given the consumer the availability and the ability to see all of that data points from the time the package ships to the time it arrives at their doorstep. Now you see all of these other consumer packaged goods, manufacturers, shippers across the country wanting that same thing, because the U.S. consumer wants that on-demand data information of where's my order. So it really goes to not just ordering groceries or ordering something off of Amazon, but we're seeing that across the supply chain, regardless of what sector or industry you're in. That small to medium-sized businesses, as well as large corporations, they want that real-time data of where everything's at right then, right now, and sharing that data across their different platforms, whether it's their warehouse providers, their transportation providers, the carriers themselves, to even their customers. Where's the order at? Is it getting picked? Is it getting shipped? Is it in transit? Is it sitting in the yard waiting to be unloaded? That critical information is becoming more and more important, especially today, because you're hand to mouth on inventory, your raw materials are on a container on the water, right? There's so many variables that really impact the supply chain. That data and transparency across partners is becoming super critical for everyone.
Totally agree.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much. And Christina, I have one question here for you from the audience. Earlier, you mentioned collaboration among suppliers. The question is, are there platforms for suppliers who are not competitors to collaborate and improve resilience by sharing shippers or in any other ways?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this is, an area as someone that works with as a 3PL, right, have a little bit of a passion there. We see it today with a lot of our customers. They have the same suppliers, they're shipping to different locations, and there's huge opportunity out there for innovation, for consolidation of shipments, to reduce cost, to reduce waste within the supply chain. I think that from a platform perspective, it's something that we're working on here at Redwood, is to really leverage our technology and innovate that so that we can uncover those opportunities and not only help our customers, but help their suppliers and their customers too. Because at the end of the day, I think it really plays into what are we doing to create sustainable supply chains and take out carbon emissions and take out that waste, right? If we're not forward thinking in that regard, then again, we're being reactive as a 3PL, which is not something that we want to do. We want to be helpful and we want to be collaborative. So there are some technologies out there, whether you're using a transportation management system or an ERP system. I would suggest, though, for those folks that are interested in connecting suppliers and collaborating right there, is to really help your 3PL or reach out to your 3PL if you don't have one. You can always contact me. That ask for help or ask what's out there in the marketplace, and have somebody look at the data, look at synergies across other networks to see if there's opportunity out there. It doesn't hurt to ask.
And I would say for whether either logistics or non-logistics, there's also share groups in the industry. So I know with SC Johnson being a privately held company, obviously we don't go into share groups with competitors, but there are share groups of other like companies that we've formed relationships with over the years that can certainly help improve visibility as well. So look to your industry too for share groups that exist.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I have one question from the audience as well here. Again, it's fairly generic, and I think it links back to some of the behaviors we have seen during the pandemic. Do the panelists believe the large downstream corporations should provide financial assistance to SMEs to help them develop resilience capabilities?
Yes. And we have.
I think there's a number of ways to define financial. Buying stuff from them is financial, but yes, I think the practices, the maturing of practices through the large organizations, which generally have the ability to fund education, training, development, and they're almost forced, because they're so large, they have a disadvantage too. They're forced to make their processes less human, if you will, right? Because people are leaving and they're transient through the roles. They also, therefore, that asset can become an advantage that they can share with SMEs as well. And you should be asking for that, because they are ones that have very defined processes that they want to be followed. The EDI just being one example of it, but it's very defined, if not codified.
Thank you. Thank you, Phil. Another question that I have is SMEs would, particularly in the situations where they are serving multiple large customers, and these large customers have expectations from them when it comes to information disclosure and reporting and stuff like that. What, in your experience, Phil, what are some of the key challenges SMEs are dealing with, and how do they go about it when it comes to this multitude of demands coming from very different customers?
Yeah, I mean, you're right on, because some, like EDI is defined. A lot of these disclosures are not defined. Annie's coming from SC Johnson are probably completely different than Christina's coming from Redwood, and they are honest. My experience in this is those expectations have to be laid out in the negotiation, like we talked about earlier. That has to be part of the service and defined. And when they change, that agreement needs to change. So if they're all of a sudden come up and say you need to disclose, 7 tiers down your supply chain where these people are getting products, they have to realize that takes effort for you to go and do, and someone has to fund that. And if they want to pay more, they can pay more. But as much as the product is the product, also the data encapsulating the product and its delivery is also a part of the agreement these days. So I would start up front, and when they change it, I would be ready to not say yes. I think Annie said it's okay to say no. They say, well, that's fine, but this is this much effort. This isn't my core business. I can go have someone else get it for you, and you can pay them directly, But if you want me to do it, I gotta charge you my operating costs plus my, my margin that I want to get on that. So it has to be a point of discussion. Information is a change, just like an expedited order is a change, right? I told you I'd give it 7 days. You want it in 3? That's a change.
Thank you, Phil. And you're Christina, any reflection on that?
I think from my end, Marco, it's very similar to Phil's, maybe not necessarily on the data and financial sharing piece, but more so on services, right? When a customer asks for more services, to Phil's point, expediting an order, changing a certain scope of that, right? All of that's fine and dandy, and you can do that. But when there's a cost to it, you need to be able to have that open conversation and a mutual agreement so that it's not, my way or the highway. I'm the large corporation. You do what I want. And SMEs need to feel comfortable having that conversation with large corporations when they're asking for changes like that. Again, what it really boils down to, do you have relationships? Are you having open, honest, transparent communication? Really strengthening that bond will help mitigate some of those uncomfortable conversations.
Right. And all of that activity typically lands in a mutual joint business plan. Because if you're a great collaborator, you both want each other to be successful.
Right.
Thank you, Annie. Christina, I think this one, there's a last question here from the audience at the moment. It's a question geared more towards you, but Phil or Annie, jump in if you have a reflection on that. What role do you see logistics and transportation firms playing in the future, like in making our supply chains, particularly from the SME standpoint of view, more resilient? Where do you see your key role?
I think our role is evolving as well, because the SMEs are being asked to do a lot more than they had to do before. 1, 2, the pandemic has basically flipped everything upside down. I mean, our world has changed so much in the last 2 years, and I don't know that there's many people that have ever really experienced what we're experiencing in transportation and logistics right now. If so, it's been a very long time. So I think it's requiring logistics providers, transportation companies to evolve too. And it's not just thinking about, well, what have we always done? We need to challenge that status quo, whether it's through visibility to data, orders, or where the truck is in real time, to innovating our technology as well. Phil brought up EDI and how we transmit information between maybe manufacturers and retailers. That's a component of it. But there's a lot of other ways that you can transmit information. There's services and platforms and texts and apps that are being built that can really connect people today that we have never been able to connect previously. And when you look at transportation and logistics, right, you've got a lot of old technology, a lot of old companies, and things that really haven't been disrupted to the degree that other industries have been disrupted. And so I think that there's a lot of opportunity to come in the near future for us to continue to disrupt in a good way, not a bad way, disrupt the innovation of transportation and logistics. And I think that transportation providers, 3PLs, and even SMEs, it doesn't matter, really should embrace that disruption and look for that tech innovation to help drive better results, more seamless supply chains or resilient supply chains. I think it will help make everybody's lives a lot easier.
So Christina, I was wondering, do you think logistics and transportation companies need to do anything different with their labor strategies?
Ooh, good question.
I'm just curious. I mean, on the heels of the question, because I think that's one of the areas, I don't know that we've unpacked it yet. I think any of us. So I'm just curious if, from your perspective, if you see anything that needs to change from a labor strategy perspective.
You got to look at that a couple different ways. I think the first thing that comes to mind is you think about trucking companies, right? And you have drivers. We've got this national driver shortage that's been around for a while. It's not going away. And when you think about drivers, there's employee operators or employee drivers, and then there's owner operators, and they're treated differently sometimes. And I think that is a labor strategy that is widely used today to mitigate benefits, to help reduce costs, and oftentimes, sometimes it has negative effects, sometimes it has positive ones. I see that becoming more of a pivotal discussion in the future of what are we doing? Is there regulations around it? Is it going to evolve into something different? If you put the driver situation away, I do think there's other labor strategies that should be evaluated in our future, whether or not we're outsourcing labor, whether we're automating, though, is a huge one, because our industry has been so kind of prime for the disruption. There's a lot of opportunity to automate process to reduce the admin or the redundant tasks that people are doing in transportation. I think that probably has the biggest bang for the buck in the near term, if folks can really adopt some of that.
Sure. Yeah. Sounds like a great opportunity for a black belt. Lean Six Sigma black belt.
There you go.
Thank you very much. So we're approaching top of the hour. Any last closing remarks, suggestions, anything else you want to share before we close?
I just want to make sure that I get invited to Annie's black belt session with Christina next week. That would be the sole thing I'd like to take away from this. Let me know. I'd love to see that happen. So
I can only take it to a green belt level, Phil.
Is it really? You're green
black
too?
belt's
I'm a white belt.
Too much stats for me.
Right.
So for me, Marco, thanks again for having us and hosting the panel. I think for me, at the end of the day, and I don't know why we shy away from this, but I think the pandemic has really just opened this up tenfold, and that is, it is just a conversation. Start the conversation, have the conversation, ask the questions, because you will be literally amazed as to where the collaboration can go.
Thank you, Annie. Phil, Christina.
Yeah, thanks again, Marco. Thanks all the attendees and my fellow panelists, Annie and Christina. It was a great experience, and sure, open to more dialogue and conversation, just like Annie said. So hopefully next year, this is done in person in the beautiful campus of Marquette. It would be wonderful to actually see some people and shake their hands and talk about moving forward.
Yeah, thank you all for the opportunity today. This has been a highlight of my day, so thank you so much for allowing me to participate. Great conversation. Again, would absolutely love to continue on. If there's anything else that we can talk about in the future, would like to also be in person someday.
Christina, thank you very much, and Annie and Phil for your time, your willingness to share your knowledge with our audience here. It's been great. Of course, all of you, including our audience, you are welcome to join us next year. Truly, hopefully in person in our new building that we are moving in by the end of this year. We are extremely excited. New opportunities will open, and yes, I'm looking forward to meeting you and sharing this with you in person. Before I close, let me just quickly say thank you also to our sponsors again that made it possible for this entire symposium, three-part symposium, to actually happen. So these are Uline, our and Direct Supply and Milwaukee Tool, our platinum sponsors. And I would like to say thank you to Redwood Logistics and GE Healthcare, our gold sponsors, and Kohler, silver sponsor, and Plexus and UPS, our blue sponsors. So if you go to marquette.edu/business/supply-chain, that's going to take you to our Center for Supply Chain Management website, and you will be able to see all the most recent updates and new events coming in this year and next year as well. Until then, thank you very much to all of you. Thank you for the audience. Thank you for the participation and all the questions. And we look forward to sharing more knowledge and insight in the future. We'll see you soon again. Let's put it that way. Yeah, I won't say in 2023, but we'll see you soon again. Yeah, there's a lot of change in our field, and there's a lot of work ahead of us. It's exciting times. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Marco.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.